with many signifying the U.S. United States happen.
5, 4, 3.
We have stage 2 engine ignition. 1 minute 25 seconds. Change pressure hold. No
Can we have igniters work? Can we have chamber ready to rise?
291 4229.
Hey guys, City Walk, City Wall here, and welcome back to Mars. So this episode, we're going to build two really big things that the city needs. And in general, I would kind of categorize the stuff that the city needs into two categories. There's kind of like stuff that we need because we're a Mars colony, and it would make sense to have that. Like, for instance, life support systems, crazy ways to grow food, things that generate oxygen, stuff like that. And that's not really like the game needs that. That's more like I'm just imagining that the city will need that in sort of like a fantasy, sci-fi way. And then there's stuff that the game actually needs in order for like the city to properly function. And so we're going to build two things in that sort of realm today. We're going to build a hospital, and we're also going to build sort of like a public transport hub. So the city is kind of divided up into two different areas. There's the lower area that's more like slums, and then there's the upper area that's very nice and wealthy. And they're each going to have their own different types of public transport. And the one for the lower part of the city is cable cars. I think that's going to look really cool, having all these like wires running through the streets. I already am doing that a little bit with some electrical wires. And so having like a cable car network, not only is it going to look cool, it's also very unique. I've never personally used the cable car before, and I've rarely seen it used, so it's fun. And I want it to kind of be like a normal public transport network in some ways. Like it should, have some central points where you can change from one cable car to another in order to get from different places. It should have a couple different lines. And so what we're going to be building this episode is kind of like the central cable car hub, or one of a few maybe central cable car hubs. I'm imagining maybe there's 2 or 3 places like this in different parts of the city. So what you've already seen me do is place down these cable car stops and just kind of like arrange them so that the top part where the cable cars actually enter and exit are just sort of like all facing in their own direction, all have a little bit of space, so that's kind of like the main hub area. And then I used a ton of these props that are like part of the conveyor belt prop pack that I created, but I'm using them here in order to kind of provide entrances and exits for where the cable cars will go into this kind of like hub. And then the next thing I did was just kind of like try and make this look good. So the first thing that I did, believe it or not, I actually was dreaming about this like one night when I was like in the middle of building this thing, and the next morning I woke up and was like, oh my god, I have to do this. I really wanted like a stairs, like to be going around this underneath part to like get you from the ground level like up into the hub. And so that's kind of the next thing I built was these, like I used some stair assets and then also some retaining walls and some tunnel block assets to just kind of like make this whole support area underneath. And then it was looking a little plain, and I found this cool thing that's like some sort of support. It's a little bit like trussing, it's a prop, and I just went crazy with this. Put it around the entire side, kind of like put the whole hub in like this sort of cage, and then covered that with a ton of these like light up signs, like vertical signs. And this was a little bit crazy on the prop count, and just like it looks pretty nuts, but I think it looks kind of cool also. So I thought this place could be a pretty good spot for like a police helipad, and so I made like a little staircase that goes up to this like upper roof, and allows people to like walk up here. Not actually, but just sort of like visually you could see how someone could get up there. And this spawns police helicopters. So this is the place that for now is going to be where police helicopters spawn until I make a much larger kind of police headquarters at some point. And right next to this area, I was having sort of a problem because these cable car stop assets, there's one particular one that comes with like a bunch of these like hedges attached to it, and I'm not using the prop it up mod because it's kind of glitchy sometimes, so I can't really just like remove the hedges. And so I needed to figure out a way to like cover up these hedges because I did not want them down here. It looked weird. So what I decided to do was turn this whole little area over here into kind of like some sort of pipe area. Like, I don't know what the purpose of this would be, but I just started off by placing down like a couple pipes just on top of the hedges, and then all of a sudden, next thing I know, there was like 10,000 pipes going through here. And I just like put a fence around it, some corrugated metal fences. And then the icing on the cake for this whole thing was I finally finished my cable car vehicle. And to start off, I just sort of made the asset as I would any asset. I based it off of some random picture I found online. Hyposim, who joined the City Wall Discord a while ago, offered to make a logo for Walk Industries, which is what you saw in the first episode, and I put it on the side of this as well. And I did 6 different versions of the texture for this model with sort of varying levels of graffiti. So when I brought the first one in, I decided to first make like a prop version, which is just going into the asset editor and choosing a prop as your base for your asset. And that was fine. But then when I went to make the vehicle version of it, the asset came in like super shiny, and there was nothing I could do about it. And I realized this is because the regular cable car vehicle is like supposed to be all metal and shiny, and they must like apply some sort of shiny effect to any model that you put into this vehicle cable car template. And so what I ended up having to do was go into mod tools. Mod tools allows you to see kind of like the code that is behind the game. And what I did was I went into there, found the material and found the shader for the material, and just kind of like started flipping around to other types of shaders. Most of them made the asset go invisible or have some sort of completely undesired effect, but there was one that I found for a water flow building. I don't even know what that is, but that ended up making it look like basically exactly the same as the prop. So I went with that, and that's kind of how I was able to get those vehicles looking the same as the props. So I just had to do that for all 5 other versions, prop version and a cable car vehicle version, and now they're in the game. They look pretty cool. They're a little big maybe, but it's pretty cool seeing them go around, and I think they fit the vibe of the city a lot better than the vanilla version. I wanted this area, this entire area that's like directly around the central sorting facility, to be kind of like a black market. Like not every single place, but kind of like just markets all around this central area, because this is sort of like the center of the city for these people who live down below. And so maybe it's not like a black market necessarily, but it's like a market where you go get your groceries, you buy like anything you could possibly ever need, and then also if you know the right people to ask, you know, you can get some stuff you're not supposed to get. So I'm using a combination of a few different types of market stalls and shops and things. Thing number 1, there's this great farmers market asset that's from the Green Cities DLC that's just like some tents that are supposed to be, you know, set up like at a farmers market, but they work pretty good for a place like this. And those are functional as commercial buildings, which is cool. And then also functional as commercial buildings are a few of these sort of corrugated metal shantytown assets. Like one of them kind of looks like it's maybe a bar or a little outdoor restaurant. Another one, I don't know, there's like a fire pit or something. So put those down, and all these ones that are actually functional as buildings really do have to be facing and near a conveyor belt road in order to give access to that, so that they can have goods delivered. But everything else that I'm placing around are props, and so those don't necessarily need to have access to anything. There's a couple good packs, like there's a market stalls pack and some stuff for like what's supposed to be like a early 1900s French city, but it works pretty well here. And then both of those packs also come with kind of like the tables and then like what's on the table, like if they're selling fruits or I don't know, like an old TV or something. That French market pack also has these funny like little men and women who are selling the things that are props, so they just like stand there motionless, but they kind of add a little bit of realism, rather than just seeing a bunch of empty stalls with like no one working at them. And then the other last thing was just kind of like some little signs here and there, like in the pathway, like maybe say what each stall sells. So this area was pretty dark. I used again the modern light pack Liberated in order to get some like string lights going kind of throughout this area. And there was like one particular spot I put down a telephone pole because there was like so many string lights going to that area that it just felt like it needed a little extra pole. And some decals on the ground, some like cracked concrete decals, some like exposed rebar, some like slime and sludge, things like that. And then I did some of this last episode too and didn't really mention it, but I put down a bunch of graffiti like on the walls and things. And these graffiti props are awesome because when you use procedural objects with them, you can like scale them up in crazy ways and like combine them. And so that's kind of what I've been doing, is like placing down like one piece of graffiti that I want to be sort of like the centerpiece and scaling it way up with procedural objects and then placing down other ones around it and like covering up bits of it. And so there's like, I'm trying to get a lot of these areas like on, large exposed walls, just like covered in graffiti. I think that's going to be a really cool thing to add to the look of this area. Okay, so the other big thing this episode was this hospital. And just to like talk a second about how this works exactly. The Natural Disasters DLC comes with helicopters that replace police cars and ambulances. So like if it's a medical helicopter, it'll take off from the building that it spawns from. It'll fly to the house of a sick person, pick them up, fly to a hospital, drop them off, and then go back to where it came from. And the way to make this actually work as your only source of ambulance is to not allow the game to spawn any regular ambulances from a hospital. So I'm using the advanced vehicle options mod, and that way the hospital literally only functions as a helipad for the helicopters to land and drop off sick citizens, and as a place for sick citizens to become better, and it has a capacity of 500 for that. So first thing I did was actually place down the vanilla hospital and some buildings that I wanted to be part of that, kind of complex, and just kind of like arrange them in generally the way that I wanted them to be arranged, and then covered up most of the roof using the network surfaces. And I used the really, really big one. I think it's the 32 meter one. And I used that instead of the ploppable pavement, because these network ones have the ability for props to like snap to them. So like if you're placing down a bunch of props on the roof, they won't like go all the way down to ground level or to the height of the nearest thing below it. They'll like stop at the exact right height where you want them, like right on top of it. And then around the edge of it, I used this awesome asset called the Peking Union Medical College Wall Network, which is like a park wall. But the amazing thing about it, I wish there was more things like this on the workshop. It's a network, and it's got some vertical height to it. It's a little bit like a retaining wall, and it is not conforming to the ground, so you can raise it up and do crazy things with it, like structurally. So I basically used like 3 of these stacked on top of each other in order to go around the network surface and make like a rim around this top part of the building, so that it looked like the network surfaces were actually attached and part of the building, as opposed to just kind of like floating there. And then I just started placing like a ton of stuff on the roof. So I started with covering up the vanilla helicopter pad that comes with the vanilla hospital with kind of like a custom one, and then started like arranging other helipads in other places on the roof. And then I used these kind of like roof walkway props and turned them into procedural objects in order to make like a very custom walkway system up above that isn't necessarily functional, but in terms of how it looks, it connects all of the helipads to like the place where you would go inside of the building. And then I just started placing a ton of other props, like some lights, which you might notice look a little different when I place them down. I had the wrong LUT turned on for a little bit here. And some other like roof props, some air conditioners, some pipes, just like trying to clutter up this whole entire roof area. I used some of the Dole nuclear power plant fan buildings in the back in order to just kind of like block up the view to that in between area, like underneath where the second level is going to go. And then lastly, I put down some of the invisible helicopter spawners at the extra helipads, like just right on top of them basically, and put down a couple of these custom helicopter props that I made that are the same exact model as the medical helicopter vehicles. So this is kind of like where a lot of the medical helicopters in the city are going to come from. This is like a main helipad in the city. The last stuff that I worked on this episode was the decorations on the side of the hospital, as well as this one walkway that's like right next to it. So I think in terms of the side of the hospital, I did do a lot of messing around with what buildings are there, with the heights of the buildings, how I'm gonna like block or see certain parts of certain buildings. That was a whole thing. And the other really cool thing I did was put down some like signs and stuff. So I have this awesome pack of like holographic signs that are way too big, and you actually can't turn them into procedural objects because procedural objects has an issue with things that have like luminance to them that like glow. So I can't scale these down. But I did find a really cool use. One of these says something, but right in the middle of the word is the letters ER. And so I arranged the building so that this ER was like poking right through the two entrances. Like this is the big emergency room, ER. And then also just put like a couple other signs around the side of the building just to like, add some decoration. Street level, I put some more shops and stalls and things, and really went to town with these decals. Like I figured out a really cool thing you can do. There's this decal that's supposed to be like for like the side of like a slope, like a drainage thing, and if you put those like facing each other, like both of them going towards the center of the street, it does this really cool thing where it like tricks your eye into thinking that the street is kind of like angled towards the center a little bit, like it's a little bit like bowl shaped or trough shaped. And so that's kind of cool. Put down a bunch of other like trash decals and things. And then above all that, I was thinking that this area, because it's like the hospital and maybe this is a slightly nicer part of the slums, I wasn't going to do like a million exposed wires like running between the buildings. And what I was going to do instead was have like all the wires, in my mind, like the electrical wires and the pipes and stuff going through these tubes. So I put a bunch of tubes like connecting the two different sides of this like alley here, and put them at different heights. Some of them connect from the roof of the hospital, some of them kind of go between the two buildings. And then the very last thing that I did, which I think really gives this area like its own character, is I put some planters along the base of the hospital and had all these like wall ivy vines like growing up the side of the hospital and then growing like sort of sometimes across these tubes so that they're like dangling over the street. So that's really cool. I hid some lights inside of the vines, which also like looked amazing. I think that was a really cool touch. And yeah, that was about this area. I think it turned out pretty cool. that's it for this episode, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Definitely let me know in the comments what you thought, if there's anything you think is particularly cool or you want to see more of. If you ever want to check out these episodes a week before they come out on YouTube, you can head over to my Patreon account where I release them early, and I also release the save games on Patreon, so if you want to actually play around in the city, that's available there. And lastly, if you like the series, if you want to see more of the city get built, definitely subscribe if you haven't already. I appreciate you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time on Mars.